Welcome back to The Price of Business. I'm your host, Kevin Price, talking to you about you and your business. Chris Corso, he is a regular on our program, and I'm always delighted to have him on the program. He does an awesome job. Chris is an attorney, both in the Phoenix area of Arizona, but he has offices also here in Houston, Texas. And we love what he's doing. We love the information that he brings to every show. And he's an extraordinary defense attorney. But in addition to that, he's a big advocate of our civil liberties, which hang in the balance and are really threatened each and every day. We always have some awesome conversations. And I thought it'd be timely to have a conversation because, first of all, I think every person in our culture today should have an attorney relationship just in case something happens to them. Just in case. Because, we live in such a society. It's an interesting society. We have 5% of the world's population and 20% of the world's prisoners. And I believe law enforcement and I believe the courts are in the convicting business, not in the justice business. And you can always say, I don't plan on ever doing anything my entire life that is criminal and actually abide by that, but that doesn't mean you won't be accused. And so I thought it'd make a lot of sense to do an interview with Chris Corso on the questions to ask when hiring a law firm. Because in order to and just so that you have those in mind. And I know he'd be one of the first people I called if I needed this kind of help. Chris, good to talk to you today. How are you?
Not too bad. Happy New Year, Kevin.
Happy New Year to you, too. Real quickly, let's just start off with what is the Corso Law Group?
Well, we're a criminal defense firm, as you say. Started off in Scottsdale, Arizona, which we still have an office, and opened up in Houston there, and, very excited to be down there. We handle, various criminal offenses all the way from traffic offenses all the way up to felony offenses. And, representing, and that's what we're going to talk about today, the approach of, as you say, what people should be looking for, just stressful time for them. But that's mainly what we do and the types of cases that we handle.
Yeah, very good. So talk about, when people, typically when they need a criminal defense attorney, they're already in trouble. There's already trouble going on. It's not one of those things people buy like insurance to prevent trouble, although I kind of think they should have some relationships out there. What immediately goes into people's mind when they're trying to hire a law firm? What do they typically look for, in that process that may or may not be beneficial getting started?
Well, I think the first thing, to understand is that it's a stressful time for them, a big time, and they're sitting there and they don't know what to do and who to call and what to make of all this. So they're nervous to begin with, and therefore, susceptible to people, prey, basically. People prey on them and attorneys, and they'll hold on to anything you tell them, basically. And some of the things that they look for when they call initially, besides price, is, what's your experience? What's your success rate? How much, how often do you win? What's your background and so on. And that's great. I mean, that's all good. And attorneys need to be experienced and need to know what they're doing, have combined experience in the law firm and multiple minds to work from. And that's fine. But there are some intangibles. There are some things that people that are in trouble and nervous about it need to be looking for, the things that you don't talk about, the relationships with the state. This is one thing I talk to clients about daily. And, I have a prosecution background in Arizona. And I talk to them about more so, hey, look, I'm not selling you anything. I don't want to sell you on our firm. What I want to talk to you about basically is here are the things you need to know in order to hire, if you're going to hire a law firm, if you're going to spend the money rather than go with a public defender. And some of those things are, as I said, what's your relationship like with the state? Because, look, defense attorneys, DAs don't get along. It's an adversarial relationship to begin with. So, and it's a small community. It really is, if you think about it. And, if the prosecutors are a different breed, I trained them, and I understand how they think and how they operate. Mm-hmm. And so they're a very factual-driven, very robotic organization, and therefore you have to know the language. You have to know how to speak to them. And if you're a defense attorney that they just don't care for, some of these prosecutors, your client's going to pay for that. And so these are some of the things, these are the things that a lot of clients don't think of, is that relationship. And, they need to understand that. It has to be explained to them, your background there. And when I say, does that make sense, Kevin? Because that's...
Sure, yeah. So talk a little bit about, how do you find out what kind of relationship the attorney has with the court?
Well, it's difficult to do. A lot of times you're having to listen to the attorney, you have to listen to what they're telling you. But there are some things that you can pick out. I mean, I guess you can go and you can look up previous cases that, that attorney may have handled and so on, but that's very difficult to do sometimes. And a lot of times these clients are up against the clock and they have to make a quick decision. So you want to listen to different points in what the attorney is telling you. Look, if a lawyer is telling you, hey, look, I practice in that court all the time. I'm in front of this judge all the time. Well, we all are. We're all in front of that judge all the time. We all go to court. It's not about that. What it's about is specifics about, hey, look, I know the prosecutors and how they operate. You have a case, client, that is a kind of a case that prosecutors just don't like to deal with. Let's say it's a victim case. Those are cases that prosecutors have a difficult time with. Because anytime you rely on an outside party, a witness, or a non-police, a civilian, it's not as reliable as, say, a DWI where you had just officers involved. So something like that is something you want to listen to and hear and say, well, okay, I'm listening to you tell me, and it makes sense. And if something makes sense to you, what the attorney is saying, then it's probably okay. It's when they start speaking over their head that that's when things go awry. Mm-hmm, but that's one of the points that they can look at is, again, what do they know about the prosecutor and how it's presented. You talk to a client about, look, we have enough experience to handle the facts and to handle the law, okay? But how are we going to communicate with this prosecutor? And I keep talking about prosecutor today because they're the ones who hold the cards. Once the police turn it in, it's them. And so what you want to do is you're listening to your attorney tell you about the relationship and how he's going to present, because it's not just about the case, it's about the person. Mm-hmm. People talk about, you hear the word criminal. Criminal's an extremely negative word, obviously. Well, another word for criminal is person.
Yeah.
Okay? And so, you have to present the person to the prosecutor, because the one thing I know about them is it's very easy to drop the hammer on somebody when you have no idea who they are, and they're a number on a piece of paper, okay? So you want to get to know your client. You want to get to know their family. And these are the things clients should be looking for. Attorneys that are talking about, hey, you're part of the representation. This is your life. Let's talk. Because if we're disorganized and we don't come to the prosecutor with information about our client and who they are, and say, hey, look, prosecutor, you have a problem with your case because of all these facts and all the law. And, oh, by the way, here's our guy. This is what he's about. Mm-hmm. Well, I've trained enough prosecutors to know that when you sit back in your chair as a prosecutor and you're thinking about a plea offer or something, and you now know what this person's about, it's a lot more difficult when there's a face and a name, to it. And so those are some of the things you want to look for. And, again, I talk about organization, presenting to them. You're not kissing up to them or walking in, but you're also not walking in and slamming the table in front of a prosecutor either. You've got to represent your client, and you're standing in front of them. So you're a reflection. So they're going to look through us. They're going to look through us to our client, and whatever opinion they have of us, unfortunately, they're going to have for the client.
Sure.
Okay.
You're kind of like an ambassador for the client.
Absolutely.
In fact, you'll have way more engagement with the judge and the jury than your client ever will.
Yeah, I mean you are. That's representation.
Yep.
I mean, you're doing for me what I can't do for myself.
Chris, we got about a minute left. Final thoughts on the best things to keep in mind when you're hiring a firm. And again, I tell the listener, and I say this sincerely, having had now many conversations with Chris and picked his brain, in the interviews, that you'd be one of the first people who I would call if I had an issue. But final thoughts on this.
Yeah, I mean, you want to look, honestly, you want to look for some experience. You want to have that, but you want to look for organization, efficiency. You want to look for no wasted movements, communication. That's another big thing. We have a communication plan, we call it. You want to have that with your lawyer. You want to be able, the biggest complaint is they don't communicate well. They never know what's going on in your case. Well, you want to make sure you have a firm where you have a set plan about how you're going to communicate, because you have to make decisions as a client, and there's no possible way you can make them if you don't know what the lawyer did and why they did it. So your law firm needs to be efficient and organized, and you're going to get that when you're talking to your attorney, and you should be able to decipher that.
Yeah, very good stuff. Chris Corso, what's your website so people can get more information?
Yeah, it's Corso, Corso, lawgroup.com. CorsoLawGroup.com.
Check them out, and at CorsoLawGroup.com. Thanks so much, my friend.
Kevin, thank you.
All right, when we come back, we're going to have more for you. Do want to remind you, best content here shows up over there at USDailyReview.com while they're liking on Facebook. Follow on Twitter.